It's just turned 11, so if you could kindly wrap up your very interesting discussions over morning tea. My name is Sam. I'll be facilitating this session today, and it is my pleasure to welcome Mike Pottenger and Paris Hekimian from Deloitte, who promised to give us a fascinating insight into the impact of AI on consulting. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you very much, Sam. The kind introduction. We promised whether or not we deliver will be dependent not just on us, but also on those who responded to our survey that we sent out last week. Thank you again for your time in doing so. Before I do begin, I would like to formally acknowledge the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands on which we gather today, and to pay our respects to elders past and present. For those of you who have not met before, I do see many familiar faces, but I'm Mike Pottenger. I'm a director in Deloitte Access Economics. I'm going to be running a couple of different screens and presentations today in the little time we have, and I'm going to be joined, it's not just going to be me, thankfully, I'm going to be joined by Paris as well, who's sitting down here. Do you want to just give everybody a wave, Paris? I work in one team in Deloitte Access Economics, Paris works in another, but we are both very enthusiastic and interested in the application of AI in our methods. I'm a director in the Melbourne office, and I lead a team that focuses on cost-benefit analysis, public policy impact analysis, regulatory impact analysis. Paris is in the education team here in Sydney. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself shortly. Now, Sam, do you want me to share my screen via Teams, right? Because we've got a couple of things to Alt-tab between. I'll do that now. Those of you watching online might lose the video feed of me, but you'll get the excellent feed of the slides that we've prepared. Win some, lose some. Now, in the program, as Sam said, we were slated to speak about AI and consulting. But I haven't always been a consulting economist. Before, about 4 years ago, when I joined Deloitte Access Economics, I was a public servant in the Victorian Department of Treasury and Finance for the better part of a decade. And in parallel with that, and for, unfortunately, my sins, about a decade before that, I was an academic lecturing in economics and public policy. And as Paris and I were working on what we wanted to talk to you about today, about the use of AI in consulting economics, it struck us that the vast majority of the points we wanted to make and the themes we wanted to talk about were relevant to giving economic advice in general, doing cost-benefit analyses in general, whether or not you were doing it from outside government as a private provider, from inside government as a public servant, or as an academic. And so we sort of spoke with Robert about the event, and with Aaron, who's going to be presenting after us. We're going to talk a lot about some lofty and abstract notions of AI and what it means. We're going to focus in this session, we decided, after consulting carefully with, again, Aaron and Robert, to talk about some pretty big picture questions about how we should be using AI. We thought this would be a good way into, or a good way to get into, the topics that we're dealing with in this particular stream today. And so what we really wanted to talk about was that biggest possible fundamental question. How and when should economists use AI in economic advice? We didn't want this to be yet another primer or broad introduction to large language models and generative AI and hallucinations, because we are now well and truly more than 2 years past the onset of ChatGPT, and most of you in this room, as we now have survey data to suggest, have used it at least once or twice a year, if not multiple times per day over the last year. So we didn't want to just get into, hey, isn't AI crazy? Here's how it works. What do you know about it? We wanted to focus on this much more fundamental question. The thing is, we also decided to send that survey because we didn't want it to just be Paris and me telling you how we use it. We thought that would be a bit boring. So the structure of what we'll have today is me setting the scene for about another 5 or 10 minutes, then Paris taking you through what it is that you have told us about how you are using AI at the moment, what it's good at, what it's bad at. And rather than doing sort of 30 minutes and then questions at the end, ask questions as we go through the session, of course, we want to involve a little bit of discussion and back and forth with you in the room. In consulting, that would mean by law we're required to call this a workshop, not a presentation, so we probably should change that in the slides as well. My answer to that question, because when I used to teach economics, I was always about teaching the principles first and foremost, is that the way we should think about how and when to use AI is by thinking like an economist. And there are 3 fundamental concepts which I think should apply specifically to the choice that we make, the decision that we make, when asking ourselves, what is it good for, how can it help us, and how should we use it? And those three concepts in my mind that are some of the more powerful in terms of our discipline as a decision science relate to a focus on trade-offs, randomness, and transaction costs. Not just the concepts themselves, but the way we think about them and apply them in our trade, in our practice. When we talk about trade-offs, we think about opportunity cost. We think about the sacrifice, the path not taken. And if we're drawing on the works of David Ricardo, comparative advantage, thinking about division of labour and specialisation, what is it right now today that we should be dividing up and specialising in our own production functions between us as the human economist and generative AI in particular? Where are the opportunities strongest for us there? I always loved that idea of comparative advantage. People will know, this is an old story, so many of you will know it, but that anecdote about Paul Samuelson, who was once asked by a mathematician who didn't really put much stock in economics to name one idea in the social sciences that was both true and non-trivial. And Samuelson allegedly, many years later, said the theory of comparative advantage. It's true and it's easily demonstrable in practical mathematical terms. Anyone sitting through a first-year course about cloth and wine and Ricardo's model gets to see the proof. But it's non-trivial because it's such a slippery concept that people fail to grasp. Sometimes they fail to believe until they've seen it proven, and even after they've seen it proven, they sometimes struggle to apply in practice. Those concepts of opportunity cost and comparative advantage, I would argue, should govern the way we choose to use AI in our own work individually. In terms of randomness, I don't just mean probability theory and randomness. The econometric techniques that we learn about probabilistic models can give us a nice and neat insight into how and why we might expect generative AI, large language models, that are probabilistic machines to perform, and when we might expect them to perform better or worse for us. And not just in terms of probability and risk, but if there are any fans of Frank Knight in the room, in terms of absolute uncertainty, when we're dealing with something that is not just unknown, but potentially unknowable. And then transaction costs. I was always a fan. I didn't discover institutional economics until after my undergrad, but when I did, I loved it. Theories of transaction costs economics from people like Douglas North and Avner Grief that looked at transaction costs and the way they prevented exchange, productive exchange between individuals. And if we start to think of our production function as a bit of specialization and exchange between us and the machine, we probably also need to think about the transaction costs involved in that trade and in that exchange. I said before it was the way we think about these things that I think matters or should matter to us as economists, because it's not just the knowledge, it's how we go about applying them and the feedback that we get from them that influences what we do. Like I said, we're going to start off very abstract, but we're going to make it a bit more concrete. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a relatively neat little framework or provocation that you can take with you into Aaron's, and if you're attending the rest of the streams today on AI and CBA, into those as well. So we figured out what we wanted to talk about. It took Paris and I a while, and thanks again to Rob and Aaron for your help. But then we had to figure out how to get into the topic, because it is pretty big and it is pretty lofty. And I thought for a long time about past ESA conferences that I'd attended and presentations that had good hooks to them. And I remembered one of the first ones that I went to about 10 years ago. Paul Ferraro was presenting, the behavioural economist. You may know his work. And I was thrilled because I got a chance to speak to him about an experiment that he ran about 10 years before that, which had always been a favourite of mine when teaching. And I liked it because it was all about opportunity cost. And that makes it perfect for this session, for us to start to get into and sink our teeth into the first of those three principles and how they should apply. Now, opportunity cost, I've already said I like it, and comparative advantage. I think it's probably one of the most important contributions of economics in the history of the discipline. That's a personal preference. For me, I think opportunity cost is the one concept you can pick up from economics and you can take into any other discipline and improve the quality of decision making, and as a result, improve the outcomes for society. But it is a slippery one, like Samuelson said about comparative advantage. It's non-trivial. The reason I like Ferraro's experiment, and in fact we'll do it in a minute so that you get to be part of it, is that it starts with a relatively conventional definition. If you just picked up a textbook in microeconomics and looked up opportunity cost, you'll get a definition usually something along these lines, the value of the next best thing you could have done, or sometimes wordier versions of the same. You'll end up with something that says the value to you of what you chose to sacrifice. Again, the road not taken. What you chose to give up in order to do what you have chosen to do. So with that in mind, I want you to picture the following scenario. You're a massive fan of Beyonce. who isn't. And the good news for you is that she's playing in town today, one night only, and you already have a free ticket to see her. So that's great. You're already very happy. The bad news for you is you're also a huge fan of Taylor Swift. Not trying to resurrect any of the beef between Taylor and Beyonce. Taylor's also performing in town tonight for one night only. I want you, if you've got, and apologies, Rob, I should have made sure that we were using Slido for this. Where are you, Rob? Yeah. Apparently I've got a rival platform. We're using Google Forms for a quick quiz. If you could please get your laptops, your phones, and head to this bit.ly link, OpCost quiz, only 1p. When you get there, it's going to ask you a quick question. It's going to tell you the scenario that I've just given you. You've got a free ticket to see Beyonce tonight. Unfortunately, Taylor Swift's in town as well. It's going to give you a little bit more information. Tickets to Taylor Swift cost $400. On any given day, you would be willing to pay up to $500 to see Taylor Swift play in concert. The question, when you get to this link that you're being asked is, what is the opportunity cost to you of going to see Beyonce tonight? I'll give you 15, 30 seconds. And then we'll have a look at your responses. Okay, responses rolling in now. Just give people a few more seconds. Okay, we've got about 40 responses. Looks like a few people are still putting their answers in. If you are, please do, but in the interest of time, I'm going to share a different screen now. I'm going to slightly clunkily just jump out and have a look instead at a Google Sheet where we're collating these answers. Now I've got two charts here. One on the left is those of us in the room who've responded today. And the one on the right is a group of about 360 people that is sort of the sum total of people that I've run this experiment with on a number of different occasions. So we've got a slightly larger sample size than the, what are we at, 44 that have responded. So again, the question was, you've got a free ticket to Beyonce, Taylor Swift's also playing, tickets to Taylor Swift cost $400, you'd be willing to pay $500, what's the opportunity cost of going to see Beyonce? When Paul Ferraro did this experiment in the first instance, it was Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan. It got rebooted in 2015 by Tim Harford, the economist from the Financial Times, with Lady Gaga and Pink, I think, at the time. So we've modernized it slightly, but the question's by and large the same. Your options were $0, $100, $400, and $500. Of the total group, about 20%, as in of all the experiments that I've run this on, about 20% of people said $100. In this group, it's about 20%. The most popular answer is $400. The correct answer is $100. The value to you of the next best thing you could have done. In terms of consumer surplus and willingness to pay, if you know you'd be willing to pay $500 to see Taylor and the ticket costs $400, then if you go and see Taylor Swift, you're getting $100 of value. Opportunity cost is the value to you of the next best thing you could have done, the thing you sacrificed to do what you chose to do. So if you choose to go and see Beyonce tonight, you are leaving $100 of value and utility on the table. That's what you are sacrificing. When Ferraro ran this experiment, in 2005, he ran it on, I think it was 200 or 300 PhD candidates and graduates in economics at the school he was teaching at. You did much better than them. They only got about 15% of that group got this answer right. And he started to pose it as a kind of fundamental question for the discipline. If opportunity cost is so important, should we be concerned that we're getting it wrong? One moment while I just jump back to the presentation. The point of the question, though, in my mind, is not that people get it wrong. It's not a trick question. It's not designed to trip up people who've forgotten some part of Micro 101. It's to demonstrate that point that Samuelson made. It's a slippery concept. It's non-trivial. And even those of us trained in using it make mistakes when we try and apply it. I do too. This is not me standing up here saying I get it right all the time and other people get it wrong. And those of you that work in cost-benefit analysis, giving public policy advice to decision makers will no doubt have seen many occasions where decision makers themselves misunderstand the real opportunity cost or where their advisors do. The point is that it is a hard concept to grasp. We almost all get it wrong, except it turns out for generative AI. Not just the latest models, but even since ChatGPT-3, if you ask it that question, it gets it right. And despite being a probabilistic model, it gets it right most of the time. Not just ChatGPT, but other large language models and generative AI tools as well. So what are we to make of that? Does it mean that economists are just not as good at economics as AI? If we're thinking about how and when we use it in our work, does it mean that we should be using it all the time when it comes to these sorts of fundamentals? Who's better? Some of the responses that we got in the survey that weren't about this example, but were just about AI in general terms, about why it was good or bad, are quite telling and quite informative for this question. One respondent said, AI's just been trained on heaps of past economics. It hallucinates, can't create new ideas. Sure, it gets things right all the time as the vibe, but that's just because it's been fed the information. So we shouldn't be surprised that a machine that's been fed 20 years of this experiment that I'm talking about in academic journals, it exploded in the blogosphere in 2005, it's been in the mainstream media, of course it's going to get it right. It's been trained on the correct answer. And it hallucinates and it gets things wrong. So no, it's not better than us. It's just a fluke that it got fed the answers in advance. That would be one conclusion. One of you responded and said, yeah, AI is great. What do you like about it? It's faster, it's more accurate, and you can always check its work. Who cares whether it's because it's what it got fed on? If it's faster and it's right and you can actually check it, we should rely on it more often. Two slightly opposing views on whether or not AI is going to be better than us or already is better than us at some of these concepts and how and when we should use it. My answer to the question is the economist's favorite answer. It depends. You know, the anecdote about former US President Harry Truman always wanted a one-armed economist because when he asked for advice, he was told on the one hand this, on the other hand that. It depends is not an answer economists should be ashamed of. We should just be good at explaining what it depends on. And I should have checked with Rob a bit more carefully before our presentations because I was also going to use and am using the quote from George Box that all models are wrong. Some models are useful. Sure, large language models may get it wrong. As probabilistic models, they may not get it right all of the time, but that doesn't mean they're not useful. The question, and what I'm about to hand over to Paris to take us through in a moment, is useful for what? What are we using it for? And why do we think it performs better or worse in some of these circumstances? Paris, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Paris Hekimian and I'm from Deloitte Access Economics, and as I was introduced, I mostly work in the education team here in Sydney, and I'd like to thank you guys for the opportunity to present today. So we sent out a survey towards the end of last week, and I'd like to thank everyone who responded to the survey. We sent the same survey out to the CBA forum attendees along with the DAE people in all across Australia. We then collated the results and received 65 responses, which we'll be going through today. These are the set of questions that we put out in our survey. So what type of economics they practice, how long you've been working in economics, how often you use Gen AI, and what it does well and what it does bad. We found that the majority of people use AI every day, and almost a third of people are using it more than twice a day. Then we thought it'd be really interesting to look at the correlation between the years of experience as an economist and how many times people use it every day. As you can see here, there's a bit of an inverse relationship. We found that the less experienced economists are using AI more frequently and every day. This tells us that early career people are adopting AI into their daily practices more than others in more seasoned professional roles. As you see on the left-hand side, the majority of people who are using AI the most in a day have been working in economics for less than a year. Then when we move onwards, we see that more people in the 1 to 3 year band are using AI every day. As we get to the mid-range, we see that people are still using AI every day, but less so than their junior counterparts. This could be attributed to maybe greater adoption into workplace practices every day, and suggests that people with less experience might be more familiar with technology, have less working knowledge and need to rely on Gen AI, or are just more familiar and comfortable with adopting AI into daily practices. When we get to the 6 to 10 year band, we see the most mixed results, with still a third using it every day, but far less so than any other cohort. When we move to the 10-year band, where people are a bit more seasoned, we see that they are using AI every day, but still less so compared to more junior workers. This could be maybe because they rely more on their existing working knowledge and have less need to use AI tools in everyday practice, or they have lower engagement with new technologies and don't have a need to use it. This all suggests that AI is being picked up into moderate usage every day or week. In the survey, we also asked people what the best practices of AI was. And we got a range of responses, as you can see here. And we ranked the top 5. But before we get to the top 5, I'd love to see if you guys could talk to the person next to you or to your table and think of what you think would be the best use of AI. I'll give you guys 10 more seconds. Thank you all. Now I'm going to have Mike go around, and if you want to volunteer what your table or the person next to you said, please feel free to do so and put your hand up.
Show of hands, please, of anyone who'd like to share their idea or example of what they think it's most likely to work well at, or what people in the room felt. Sanj has that corner of the room covered. I have this one covered. So please, who's willing to volunteer? Yes.
I'll check that on my phone. We all find it quite useful for proofreading and drafting emails. So I don't know if that's
Proofreading and draft emails. Okay.
best use of it, but it's definitely helpful.
Well, there are two games of put here. There's what do you think it's good at, and then there's Family Feud style. Is it going to be top of the board? So proofreading and draft emails, maybe one. Anyone else want to volunteer a different answer? Did anyone come up with something other than proofread? Yes, please.
Our table discussed on how it's really good at writing executive summaries and writing code when you're not a trained coder.
Vibe coding and exec summaries of documents already prepared. Okay. Other examples? Coding, exec summaries, writing emails. That's it. That's all we're good for. Ashley, please.
We disagreed slightly, but I think checking code rather than writing code from scratch tends to be where I find it to be more effective, and also summarizing research if you're a time for economist.
Thank you, Ashley. Disagree slightly. Not good for writing code, but good for checking code. You can do the second half of our presentation because we're going to come right back to the idea that it depends. Any other examples, please?
Recording meeting minutes, but you have to record the meeting first. And also just finding research, but sometimes it like comes up with sources that aren't real sources. It just makes things up.
Meeting minutes, research. We've almost completed the full list. Is there anything on the list that people also think should be top of the ladder but hasn't been mentioned yet? Those are 5 or 6 good examples. No more bets? Nothing else? Okay. Back to you, Paris.
Thank you. So now we'll be going through the top 5 most common, most effective uses based on your survey results. And coming at number 5 was summarizing literature. This was then followed by brainstorming ideas, research, writing, and the top reported one was for modeling and data analysis, which also includes troubleshooting Excel formulas and coding. On the other hand, we also asked what the least useful aspects of AI was and what it doesn't do very well at yet. Again, can I get you guys to split out into your groups again and talk about what you think the top least use would be? Ten more seconds. And when you're ready, please put your hand up and Mike will come around.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If there is anybody on that side of the room that wants to make Sanj do some work, so I'm not the only one running all over the place. Any volunteers? What do you think you'd find top of the list? Rob, after spending so much time asking everybody else to ask questions and chime in, here you are. Thank you.
Sorry, and forced, for example. Look, this is more a personal thing, but I think AI is a bit like a very eager puppy who will just go out and want to get you something, and it doesn't matter what it is, just run around the room. Or it's like a cat that goes out at night and just might bring you back a mouse or a dead bird sometimes. So what's not very good is the quality and being sure you're not getting hallucination.
Thanks, Rob. Quality, making sure you're not getting hallucinations, bad at those things. Too eager, too much like an eager puppy. Other nominations for top of the board? I certainly, I mean, we could go to a table we've not heard from before. We didn't hear anything from this table. Table captain?
No one deals with stakeholders well.
So we're being unfair by putting stakeholders on the list at all. This is, you made it, so what was your name? Tim. It's an excellent point. Part of what we'll be getting at, spoiler alert, in terms of comparative advantage is AI might be bad at some of these things, but is it worse than us? What's its opportunity cost? Is it good enough that we're actually better off doing something else with our time? So I like your answer because you've given away the punchline. I like that. No one's good at dealing with stakeholders. Give AI a break. All right, another table. No, we heard from you guys. And we heard from you guys. We didn't hear from this table. One idea. Visual design and presentation based on experience. You've used it and thought that just looks terrible. Throw it away, start again. needs a personal touch to it. So it can spit out stuff that looks fine, but it doesn't have any real character, doesn't have some personal touch.
Your shareholders or someone else, and it's could be tailored for that audience.
So too generic, doesn't know the audience well enough. Thank you. Sanj, do you want to pick on a table out there? You've got the power now. You can just pick a table and make them speak to. We'll get one or two more.
I think we agree on AI is very bad on critical thinking because most of the times when you ask AI to tell you something and then you say, no, you're actually wrong, the AI will just say, yeah, I'm wrong, but I'm actually right, and just give you the same thing again. Yeah.
The problem with the sycophantic large language model just agreeing with you at every turn of the way. And then maybe one more from up the back, Sanj, and we might continue. Thank you.
I think it's pretty specific to the work that we have done, but I found that using it for kind of technical software and that sort of thing is just absolutely useless. I think there's just not enough source information out there for it to pull from.
Using it for the sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, by contrast, maybe Excel, there's so much, I don't know, forums and things like that it can pull from and figure it out. But yeah.
Are you by any chance the respondent that said it's terrible at analysis? We've already got software packages like Stata and SPSS that do this stuff properly and do it right. We should not be using it for that. Was that you?
That was me, but I do agree with that.
It was a strong response. All right, thank you, everybody. Paris, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Document, like you cannot upload it or get any information from there.
The lack of confidentiality and the restrictions that imposes on how you can use it or what it's able to access and use. I mean, that goes maybe hand in hand with Rob's question on cabinet in confidence CBAs before. You're not going to be able to fire up ChatGPT and get a lot of output from CBAs behind locked doors. Thank you. Paris, please.
Thank you. So the top 5 least useful, starting us off, was accuracy. This is followed by writing, visual design and presentation, so someone did get that right-ish. Research, and coming at number 1 was modelling and data analysis. Now, we quickly put them side by side. Mike put this in the deck very late last night, so I haven't really looked at it yet, but this shows a more detailed breakdown of the responses and by the proportion of what people thought was useful and not useful. So people thought brainstorming ideas was useful as most, but at the bottom you see accuracy when most people said that they had issues with that and it wasn't useful. So when we do a side-by-side comparison of the top 3 most and least useful use cases of AI, we can see that first for both of them, it's modelling and data analysis, with someone saying that it's great at finding errors in coding or providing specific coding, whereas on the other end, it's not ready to use and needs to always be edited. This goes back to the it depends answer from an economist because it depends on your use case. So it might not be great at generating code, but it could be somewhat good at editing or refining code. As you'll see in this list again, you see research as number 3 as the most useful, but then number 2 and least useful, which was very interesting to look at. So we came up with some reasoning why this might be happening and put it down to a few reasons, but I'm sure there are a lot more. And starting us off, prompt engineering skills, where the better the prompt, better the output. As Peter said this morning, garbage in, garbage out. So if your prompt isn't good or highly detailed, you might not get the response you want from ChatGPT or your preferred Gen AI platform. Another reason is level of expertise. So someone with a deep knowledge in an area might not find it as effective at research because they're already an expert and they might be more critical of what they're thinking of the output. This is then followed by platform capabilities where different tools have different strengths. So Claude would be best at doing data analytics, helping with coding, whereas Perplexity would be better at doing desktop research and drawing upon more accurate sources. Lastly, task complexity is a big one. Gen AI is, after all, a large language model. So it does best in pattern-based tasks and things that are a bit more structured and simple. It won't do very well in something that's highly ambiguous highly specialized or needs a lot of context. I'll now pass back to Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Bear. So we'll say just a few more things to wrap up, and we'll probably finish with 2 to 5 minutes for time for other general questions or comment. Hopefully the discussion you've been able to have already has given you some food for thought. And again, the purpose of this session is just to put some of these ideas out there so that as you're following through with Aaron's session next, and then the other AI streams after the break and in the afternoon, some of these thoughts are floating around. That point in particular about the level of expertise in a particular topic. You know, are you a beginner and a novice trying to learn a little bit and get a toehold on an idea or something in economics or an analytical technique? Or are you the country's leading expert? And you're probably always going to be, or at least for the foreseeable future, ahead of what these sorts of tools can generate. Sometimes I find, and this goes back to Tim's point about, well, you know, is it fair to judge AI whether it's good at stakeholder management if people struggle with it themselves? Another point of comparison in my mind is with something as simple a tool as Wikipedia. If you looked up a Wikipedia entry and asked a group of 100 people, what do you think? Is this entry helpful, not oversimplifying, too complex? You'd get a range of answers. There'd be some experts who would look at it and say, this is redacting half the relevant information. It's trying to have both sides of the argument and it's not really illustrating the real facts of the case. I know so much about this that that's not a useful resource. But if you'd never known anything about it before, it might be the best jumping off point. When we say that whether or not AI is going to be good or bad depends, and what it depends on, it's not just what we're using it for, it's us ourselves. We should be looking at our own expertise and asking ourselves, do I think that I am the expert in this, or do I need some external expertise? And how can I combine what ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude can offer in terms of that expertise with what I have from my colleagues around me? I spoke before about that potential division of labour. I don't see much of a future in every economist just going off on their own and only working with a large language model. It still needs to be groups of us, teams of us working together, but also leveraging or adding some of these tools to the mix. So I wanted to finish by bringing it back to those 3 fundamental concepts that I think we should be applying to this question or decision, the personal choice we're making about how and when to use these things. And to go back to that glowing praise from one of you that AI was faster, that it was more accurate, that it was verifiable, because I think these 3 parts of that very, very high praise map quite neatly to those 3 fundamental concepts. Because as economists, if we think something is faster, we like it because it's more efficient, right? It takes less time. We're thinking of trade-offs. If we can do something faster, if it takes less time, then the opportunity cost of that thing has reduced. It's gone down. We should be thinking of those things, as I said before when Tim spoiled the show, in terms of not just, is it faster than me? And opportunity cost is not just about speed, it's about quality. So not just, is it faster than me? Yes or no. Is its output better than me? Yes or no. We should be thinking, if we're really thinking as economists, in terms of opportunity cost and comparative advantage. David Ricardo should still be able to guide our decision-making in what we are using it for and when. In my case, I work on a wide range of projects with a wide range of clients and a large number of different teams, and we always have people coming up through the ranks wanting to learn new techniques, to figure out new methods, to understand the guidance that we apply, the New South Wales Treasury guidelines, other guidelines. My time is arguably much better spent talking to them, human to human, to help them understand the tacit knowledge of our craft, the things that aren't always written down, that won't be in the feedstock that these models are trained in. And so if generative AI can do one of my tasks, even just 50, 60, 70% of the way, and I can patch it up quickly, but if that frees me up to focus on where I have a comparative advantage in running those teams and projects, then that's great from my point of view. That's how I would prefer to use it, or how I would choose to use it. In terms of accuracy, and a lot of the comments, and again, the fact that modeling analysis is right there up at the top as both the best and the worst, and actually you kind of guessed it before when you were saying, well, maybe the people who think it's best is that it's best for vibe coding, getting something started, didn't know how to write a Visual Basic script in Excel, but now I've got something that seems to work, that's great. As opposed to, no, if you try and do the entire regression in one of these tools at the moment, instead of using Stata or SPSS, it'll crash. When we think about accuracy, when we think about randomness, as I mentioned before, we're trained to think probabilistically, right? So we should be able to look at these models and tools, and I'm not suggesting we will get this right, but we should be able to hazard a guess. We should be able to ask ourselves, do I think for this task, it's likely to make accurate predictions, and why? Now, Economists are not best placed to make this judgment. AI software engineers are probably much better placed to make this judgment, but we could at least have a crack at it. Do we think there's a lot of this in the feedstock or not? Is Paul Ferraro's opportunity cost quiz written about 1,000 times over 20 years, and have they all been trained on it or not? That should at least help influence our prior assumptions about whether it's likely on balance to do a good job or not. And again, if we come back to the idea of not just risk, but Frank Knight and genuine uncertainty, things that are just not known or knowable, thinking about the training feedstock that a model has at its disposal and whether you're trying to make a prediction or trying to get it to make a prediction that's out of sample or even out of distribution is something that we should really be able to have a pretty good grasp of. And then finally, verifiable. Whoever felt that it was easily verifiable, the clue is probably in the word easily verifiable. How hard is it going to be to check? The transaction costs spring to mind for me here. How much time and effort is it going to take you to check what it tells you such that you can be comfortable using that output? When Alex was talking before the break, he was talking about New South Wales Treasury guidelines and proportionality. And I'd suggest that that applies here as well. You don't necessarily need to dot every I and cross every T if it's a low stakes output that not much hinges on. But if it's complex, if it's high risk, if it's something that all of your analysis is depending on, you really need to know that it's right. So how are you going to balance that risk-reward trade-off? Again, we're all economists. We're familiar with things like the principal agent problem. Whenever you use generative AI, it's no different from the principal agent problem between two humans. You're delegating some role to it as your agent, and you are trusting to some degree that it will act in your interests. If anyone is reading up on AI alignment over the last 2 years, it's not a bad way of thinking about that problem. So is this an area where we think it will be something that we can check in a way that is proportionate to the scale of what's at stake? I said at the start of the session, we were hoping to leave you with a couple of key questions that you could use as a framework to think about your own choices about this and to reflect throughout the day. If we take just a few use cases, and again, the point is not that if you ask these questions, everybody makes the same decision. It's going to depend on what you are doing, where your expertise lies, but it might at least be one way to structure it. Because I look at this, I don't use large language models or generative AI for emails. I know a lot of people do. I can understand though, using this framework, how that makes sense. It's faster at writing the email. It's got a pretty good feedstock of sort of business casual language on the internet to be able to generate polite, formal emails, but it's also pretty easy to check. So the opportunity cost is good. The probability is pretty high that it's going to write something that's halfway decent. And if you were going to spend 2 minutes drafting an email and you only spend 30 seconds editing it, then sure, that checks out. Go right ahead. About a year ago, there were a bunch of news articles running about people using ChatGPT to do basic calculations. Like mathematics in terms of division and multiplication. And the articles were lampooning large language models for not getting the right answer. But it felt to me like they should almost have been, no offense to people who may use it this way, but they should almost have been lampooning the user. We have a machine that can calculate with 100% accuracy x times y or y divided by x. We've had it for a long time. A calculator works very quickly, is deterministic, and always gives you the same answer. Using ChatGPT is longer and slower than using a calculator. And let's be honest, like they don't make as many mistakes in basic calculation as they used to, but they are still probabilistic models. Maybe they will. And then if you actually need to verify it, because you're about to feed the thing into something, the time it takes you to manually check it on a calculator or in Excel is the time you could have spent in the first place. So when the articles are running around saying these models are stupid, they can't calculate x divided by y, I wanted to know who was using them for this purpose and why. We could talk about the commodification of these and the fact that they're consumer products and they rope you in with an excitable interface. The fact that ChatGPT populates line by line so it feels like someone's talking to you. Doesn't need to do that. It could just give you all the text in one hit. But there's a design choice to feed it to you so it feels interactive. So there may be good reasons for it or reasons for it. But that to me does not seem like a sensible use case. And then in cases where it differs, one example would be, just to finish up, well, actually there are probably two. Maybe I'll go with just one. People that use it to search. When deep research came out, I was quite excited. Wow, give it a prompt, writes a 3,000-word essay, includes the citations so you can go and check them. So as long as it's on a topic where the feedstock is high, the accuracy should be pretty good. The opportunity costs, the time saving is off the chart from having me or one of my team members go and write a 5,000-word summary of this particular area of research, and the links are right there for me to check. But I stopped using it for that because I kept finding that I just didn't trust it. And so I still wanted to go back and read all of the sources in full or go back and search them all for the right keywords. And sometimes it would paraphrase. So the idea was in there, but not in the same way. I started finding that that last step of verifying the essay it had written was chewing up so much time and leaving me still on edge about whether I could trust it, that I preferred to just go and do it myself. And what I also realized is that, and again, this is personal preference, but I also realized that it was the actual act of doing the research that was teaching me a lot about the thing I needed to write about. I wanted to know the stuff that it looked for and didn't find, not just the stuff that was there. So hopefully this is something that you can use throughout the day. Thank you very much for your time. We'll leave the presentation there. Sam, if you did want to take any questions, we can, but we're pretty much bang on. I think we've used our question time for general discussion.